Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Secret Garden. I forgot the name of the book, but I remembered who it's by. It's by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So, progress. So, let's get going. And I've just seen the first line that we're going to be reading. But it is to do with clothes, so it's fine. I hate black things, said Mary. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. Why doesn't they put on their own shoes? She said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. My ayah did it, answered Mary, staring. It was the custom. She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do a thing their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, It is not the custom, and one knew that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything, but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings, and picking up things she let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair, and button boots, and pick things up and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things. If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would perhaps have laughed at Martha's readiness to talk. But Mary only listened to her coldly and wondered at her freedom of manner. At first she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girl rattled on in her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice what she was saying. You should see 'em all," she said. "There's 12 of us, and my father only gets 16 shillin' a week. I can tell you my mother's put to it to get porridge for 'em all. They tumble about on the moor and play there all day, and mother says the air of the moor fattens 'em. She says she believes they eat the grass same as the wild ponies do. Ah, Dickon, he's 12 years old, and he's got a young pony he calls his own." "Where did he get it?" asked Mary. "He found it on moor with its mother when it was a little one, and he began to make friends with it and give it bits of bread and pluck young grass for it, and it got to like him, so it follows him about, and it lets him get on its back. Dickon's a kind lad, and animals likes him." Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own, and had always thought she should like one. So she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon, and as she had never before been interested in anyone but herself, it was the dawning of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room which had been made into a nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy old pictures on the walls, and heavy old oak chairs. A table in the centre was set with a good substantial breakfast, but she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the first plate Martha set before her. "I don't want it," she said. "Thou don't want thy porridge?" Martha exclaimed incredulously. "No. Thou doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle on it, or a bit of sugar." "I don't want it," repeated Mary. Said Martha. "I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes." "Why?" said Mary coldly. "Why?" echoed Martha. "Because they scarce ever had their stomachs full in their lives. They're as hungry as young hawks and foxes." "I don't know what it is to be hungry," said Mary, with the indifference of ignorance. Martha looked indignant. "Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see that plain enough, she said outspokenly. I've no patience with folk as sits and just stares at good bread and meat. My word, don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em had what's here under their pinafores. Why don't you take it to them? Suggested Mary. It's not mine, answered Martha stoutly. And this isn't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for Mother and give her a day's rest. Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. You wrap up warm and run out and play, you, said Martha. It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat. Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. Out? Why should I go out on a day like this? Well, if that doesn't go out, they'll have to stay in, and what has they got to do? Mary glanced about her. There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared the nursery, she had not thought of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. Who will go with me? She inquired. Martha stared. You'll go by yourself, she answered. You'll have to learn to play like other children does when they haven't got sisters and brothers. Our Dickon goes off on the moor by himself and plays for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony. He's got sheep on the moor that knows him, and birds as come and eats out of his hand. However little there is to eat, he always saves a bit of his bread to coax his pets. It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out, though she was not aware of it. There would be birds outside, though. There would not be ponies or sheep. They would be different from the birds in India, and it might amuse her to look at them. Martha found a coat and hat for her, and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her her way downstairs. If they goes round that way, they'll come to the gardens, she said, pointing to a gate in a wall of shrubbery. There's lots of flowers in summer-time, but there's nothing blooming now. She seemed to hesitate a second before she added, One of the gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary in spite of herself. Here was another locked door, added to the 100 in a strange house. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so sudden. He wouldn't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. There's Mrs. Medlock's bell ringing. I must run. After she was gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to the door in the shrubbery. She could not help thinking about the garden which no one had been into for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like, and whether there were any flowers still alive in it. When she had passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in great gardens, with wide lawns and winding walks with clipped borders. There were trees and flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes, and a large pool with an old grey fountain in its midst. But the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden which was shut up. How could a garden be shut up? You could always walk into a garden. She was just thinking this when she saw that, at the end of the path she was following, there seemed to be a long wall, with ivy growing over it. She was not familiar enough with England to know that she was coming upon the kitchen gardens, where the vegetables and fruit were growing. She went toward the wall and found that there was a green door in the ivy, and that it stood open. This was not the closed garden, evidently, and she could go into it. She went through the door and found that it was a garden with walls all round it, and that it was only one of several walled gardens which seemed to open into one another. She saw another open green door, revealing bushes and pathways between beds containing winter vegetables. Fruit trees were trained flat against the wall, and over some of the beds were glass frames. The place was bare and ugly enough, Mary thought, as she stood and stared about her. It might be nicer in summer when things were green, but there was nothing pretty about it now. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. So I will say thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.